Hello all, thank you for joining. I know for those of you who are in US, it's kind of a holiday weekend, but I see there's a good attendance here, which is great. So without any delay, let's jump right into the, uh, the midst of things. There are three things that we'll try to cover today. We'll start with the flashcard of Scrum. Actually, I just want to combine the first and the second agenda items together. So we'll learn about the Scrum framework. Lately, I've been getting a lot of fundamental questions on the Scrum framework. So we'll try to address all of that. So it's good if I go over the whole framework, from a high level, and just go over, the basic elements of that framework. And then towards the end, if we have time, we'll go over the Jira as a tool. Okay, so this is something also I've been getting a lot of questions on how we can, how we can use Jira. Okay, so and at the very end, if there are any question and answers, I'll try to answer all the questions that you have. Okay, let's get started with Scrum. Okay, so Scrum is one of the agile methodologies. There are many methodologies out there that are agile. Scrum is one of the most popular ones. And it's a term that originated from the game of rugby, okay, where the team, it's very similar to American football, where the team takes the football from one end of the field to another in small increments. Okay, so it's like you're incrementally taking the football as a team against the opposing team in small increments, and the goal is to take it from one end to the other. Okay, so it's a similar concept. If you compare it with the traditional way of project execution, that I feel is more, it's similar to volleyball, where you have two teams and you're trying to throw the ball from one court to another. Okay, so there's a drastic difference in which an agile methodology perceives a project versus a traditional methodology that perceives a project. So Scrum was invented, like it came together, it's been evolving even now, but it came together about 10 or 12 years ago. And there have been, great evolution in there. There have been many improvements. It has become very, very popular. It has a very strong community around it. There are other agile methodologies as well, which I'm not covering in this session, but we'll go over them in, other sessions that are in coming Fridays. But we are going to focus today only on Scrum. Okay, and obviously we are constrained by time, so we'll try to cover as much as we can. I'll try to keep the discussion at a high level. We'll delve into some of the deep, fundamental elements of Scrum, but we'll also see some, sample questions towards the end that will help you understand even more. So this is a very colorful picture of how the Scrum framework looks like. Um, there are many colors, so I don't want you guys to get kind of distracted by everything. There's so much happening on this slide, but we'll try to take one thing at a time. Okay, so let's start from the sprint. Okay, so sprint is a keyword here, an agile keyword, a Scrum keyword. Okay, sprint is equivalent to iteration in general agile concept. Okay, so whether you hear sprint or iterations, they all mean the same thing. So you can see that there's a sprint. It says 1 to 4 weeks. This is a suggested duration of a sprint. Now, sprint is a time boxed duration of time in which team decides the amount of work they're going to finish, and at the end of that sprint, at the end of that time box period, they produce finished work, okay, which you see on the right hand side. Okay, so this finished work, it is important to understand what this finished work includes. Okay, it is not a finish It is not a completion of development work. It is not completion of just QA work. It is not. It is any development task or any requirement that is taken up is shippable when we call it a finished work. Okay, it means that it is going to add value to the customer. It can be delivered to the customer. This is a very important concept in Agile. It is not an end of a phase. Okay, sprint is a time box duration in which team as a whole finishes the requirement in totality to a point when it is that it is deliverable to the customer. Okay, so it is very important to understand that. And depending on your domain, depending on your team size, depending on your release cycles, you can decide how you want to design your sprint. Whether you want it 1 week, or you want 4 weeks, or you want something in between. The projects in which I'm working, we have a 2 week sprint. It works pretty well for us. It's possible that for some teams, 4 weeks work well. There are also teams which have sprints which are longer than 4 weeks. Okay, they are more of an exceptions. There may be success stories with that, but as per Scrum's guidelines, we should try to keep the sprint in 1 to 4 week cycle. Okay, so this is your sprint cycle. Okay. Also, there is a daily stand-up, okay, or a daily Scrum meeting, which happens every day. We're going to come to that in a little bit, but we must understand that the sprint cycle is a time box duration, and at the end of the sprint cycle, whatever that is produced is is um, is shippable to the customer. Okay. Now let's look at some of the roles that are there before we look at all the artifacts and the ceremonies. So we'll start with the product owner role first. Product owner is similar to an analyst or a business analyst in traditional project cycle. Product owner here is talking to, as you can see, it's talking to the stakeholders, to the customers, to the users, to the end users. Product owner is somebody who understands who's a subject matter expert in the functional domain of the product. Okay. So it is also possible that a team may have more than one product owner. Sometimes, it is required to have more than one product owner, but it is more of an exception than an example. So as per Scrum's guidelines, there's one product owner. There's a Scrum Master, which is here. Scrum Master is similar to a project manager in traditional project management. Okay, so those of you who have worked in project as a project manager, or those of you who have worked as even program managers, you may be aspirants in becoming Scrum Masters. Okay, if you're following Scrum methodology, there are other names, like there are more generic terms in Agile for Scrum Master, like Agile PM or Agile Coach. Agile Coach is a very generic and very good term, in my opinion, which can be used anywhere. The important thing here, compared to the traditional way of project management, is that Scrum Master is a facilitator. Okay, Scrum Master is not the whole and sole owner of the whole product or project. Scrum Master does have a lot of power, but there is there is a difference in the mindset. The Scrum Master has to be more of a facilitator. Think of it as a servant leadership. Servant leadership is another very big mantra in Agile, and we're going to talk about servant leadership later on in one of the other webinars later on. But there's a huge change in the way Scrum Master's role is perceived in Agile. Scrum Master has to be an expert in the Agile values and Agile principles. Okay, their role is of a facilitator. They have to serve the team rather than being the you know rather than being the sole owner, or the sole does not have the is not responsible for every single thing in the team. Okay, and then we have the team, which is a third role in Scrum. So the team, or team member. Okay, team member is a team is a very um, kind of a vague or very loose term in Scrum. It contains members who have cross-functional skills. Okay, they may be architects, they may be designers, they may be QA engineers, they may be documentation experts, technical documentation experts. They can be you know UI experts. They can be user experience experts. They can be QA automation experts. Okay, so the team has a very cross-functional skill. They have very varied skills depending on the kind of product they are building, depending on what kind of expectation is from that whole development cycle of the Scrum team. In As per Scrum, the size of the Scrum team can be 7 plus or minus 2. Okay, so this is a suggested size of a Scrum team, from 5 to 9 members, and then you have the Scrum Master and the product owner, so two more. Okay, some of the books also say the size of the team should be as big to consume two large pizzas. Okay, which is another way of looking at it, but just to give you an idea how big or how small a Scrum team is. Okay, a lot of people ask this question that we are building a very big product, so obviously we have more engineers than just 9. Okay, so how do we scale? Okay, so there are different ways. I mean, they can be multiple Scrum teams, and there are scaling models for Scrum team. We are not going to go into that details today. For now, you have to understand that the Agile team is a small team. Okay, compared to the traditional teams where there are 40 engineers, 15 engineers, 100 engineers. Okay, working on the same project at the same time. Okay, but the Scrum teams, they are much smaller. Okay, the max they would have is 9 engineers or 9 team members. Also keep in mind there are Scrum teams that may have more than 9 members. Okay, but then again, they are more of an exception than examples. Okay, let me mute. There's a little bit of noise here. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we have 3 roles. We have product owner, we have Scrum Master, and we have team. All right. Now let's look at the ceremonies that are there. Okay. So we'll start with the sprint planning meeting. Okay, I hope you can see this green marker on the page. There's a sprint planning meeting. So before understanding what sprint planning meeting is, I'll just quickly talk about the product backlog, okay, which is one of the artifacts, very important artifacts. So product backlog is collection of all the requirements of all the features that are required in the product, but they are not there. Okay, so think of it as an unfinished work. Okay, and in Agile terms, we call the requirements or the features as stories. Okay, so think of all these think of product backlog as a union of all the unfinished stories. Okay, very important. Not only that, product backlog is a complex artifact. It sounds very easy from a high level, but deep down, when you get into the depth of things, it is a complex artifact. Okay, there are different types of product backlogs. There is um, release backlog, there is prioritized backlog, there is risk adjusted backlog. There are various different types of backlogs. Okay, but it is product owners' responsibility to maintain this product backlog. Okay, it is one of the major responsibilities of product owners. What it means is product owner is adding stories or requirements to the product backlog. They are also prioritizing the stories in the product backlog. So coming back to the sprint planning is an activity or a meeting or a ceremony in which team comes together, including product owner and scrum master, and they understand what is prioritized in the backlog, in the product backlog. And they try to pop things out from there into another artifact, which is called sprint backlog. Sprint backlog is the collection of the stories that the team commits to finish in a sprint, okay, which is your time bound duration. So what you're doing is let's say the team comes together and they understand from product owner that story number 1, 2, and 3 that are listed here are the top priority stories. Okay, these stories are in the backlog. That means they are unfinished. And in the next sprint or the sprint for which they're planning, they are going to commit to these stories. Let's say they decide on these 3 stories. They do, as a part of sprint planning, there's a lot of things that are done in there. Okay, we are not going to go into very deep details on how the sprint planning is done, as long as you understand what it is and why it is needed. So while doing sprint planning, as a part of that, you have to drive clarity. The team has to understand what are the details of the story. What is expected in that story, what is in scope, what is out of scope. All that, there's a lot of discussion that happens about a story. And those of you who are familiar with stories already, there are three parts to a story. Okay, it's called 3 C's. There is card, conversation, and confirmation. Again, I'm not going to go into the details, but the conversation is a major part of a story. Okay, which means that there needs to be some healthy discussion. There has to be a lot of driving clarity of the story that is needed. Okay, for the team members to understand what is expected as an outcome in that story. Only then they are able to estimate. Okay, and there are various estimation techniques as well in Agile. Okay, and Agile encourages us to use story points, which is relative sizing. Okay, so, but anyways, so once you do an estimate, you are able to understand how many stories you can finish in this period of your sprint. Okay, let's say your sprint is 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, how many stories you can finish? And by finishing, we means everything. Okay, we mean if there is any designing that is needed, the implementation, coding, testing, reviews, unit testing, integration testing, functional testing, performance testing, if that's needed. If there's more there's some automation that needs to be done. Okay, execution of the test cases. If there are issues found in the execution of the test cases, are those issues resolved? Okay, so there are a lot of things that are required as a part of a story to call it complete. Okay, only then it is considered finished. Okay, only then it is shippable to the customer. Okay, so think of it as you picked up a functionality and you implemented it in totality to a point that it can be given to the customer. Okay, so in sprint planning meeting, the team decides how many stories they can reasonably finish in that duration of sprint. Okay, that is called sprint planning meeting. And the stories that they pick up for the sprint constitute the sprint backlog. Okay, the slide it is showing as task breakout. However, the task here is used in a very loose manner. Okay, it is not exactly a task breakout, it is a story. Okay, so you can break out that you can decide to break down that story in different parts if there are different experts required for it. Okay, but the story as a whole cannot be closed or cannot be finished until all those parts are done. Okay, so that's a sprint backlog. Okay, and sprint planning meeting. Then we are talking about the ceremonies and the meetings in Scrum. Okay, so we talked about roles, these three roles: product owner, team, and Scrum Master. We're talking about the ceremony. So the first one was the sprint planning meeting. The second one, and probably the most important, is the daily Scrum meeting. Okay, all those of you who have heard about Spring, who understand Sprint, Scrum, or Agile, I am sure you must have heard about the daily stand-up meeting or the daily Scrum meeting, okay, things of that nature. It's even though it is simple to understand and it's very popular, it is not very well understood by the community. The goal of the daily Scrum meeting is not status reporting. If you're treating your daily Scrum meeting as status reporting, you are not really you're not really doing daily Scrum. So what is it that we do in the daily Scrum meeting? Okay, so first of all, it is as the name suggests, it is done once a day, and everybody in the team here comes together and they try to answer three questions. Okay, what is it that I did today? What do I plan to do tomorrow? And is there anything blocking me? Okay, these are the three questions that they try to answer. They take turns in doing that. Okay, Scrum Master is expected to mediate this meeting. Scrum Master is expected to hold this meeting. However, even if the Scrum Master is not available, it is it's it's expected that the team by itself as a whole will still conduct this meeting. Okay, so now these days we have distributed teams. Okay, we have teams located in different parts of the world, okay, in different time zones. So it's possible that even though it is the end of the day, your day, it may be a beginning of the day for somebody else. Okay, so the questions that they'll still try to answer the same three questions. So what is it that I did today, or what was it that I did yesterday? What do I plan to do today or tomorrow, depending on which time zone you are in? So what did I do in the last 24 hours? What do I plan to do in next 24 hours? And if there's anything blocking me. Another important thing to remember is that the daily Scrum meeting is time boxed. Time boxed is a jargon that I'm using, but it's a fixed. It has a fixed duration. It is time boxed to not more than 15 minutes. Okay, it is very important. I have come across teams that take half an hour, 1 hour for the daily Scrum meetings. It's a really bad usage of daily Scrum meeting. Okay, so anything there may be issues that need to be addressed. There may be blocker issues that are there that are brought up. Okay, it doesn't mean that we start resolving those blocker issues right there in the daily Scrum meetings. Okay, those issues, they can be discussed in a breakout session after the daily Scrum, only with the resources that are actually needed. Okay, the whole team doesn't have to be involved in solving a blocker issue for a resource A. Okay, but it's possible that the whole team may be needed. In that case, they will all contribute to it, but it's more of a rarity than usual. So the daily Scrum meeting has to be time boxed to not more than 15 minutes. Also, I'll just come back and emphasize on the same point that I said before, that the daily Scrum is not a status reporting meeting. Status can be gathered from all these different tools, wonderful tools that we have these days. Okay, gathering status should not require everybody in the team to come together. Okay, it can be gathered in so many different ways, okay, which are more efficient and more accurate. A daily Scrum meeting is more for the team itself. It's kind of a team huddle, okay, to make sure that the team realizes what they're focused on. Okay, so just regain their focus on what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to complete the sprint for the the items that they have committed, for the stories that they have committed. That is a goal of the sprint. Okay, and they come together, they do a huddle, and they regain that focus. Okay, as an offshoot, they find things that are blocking them. Okay, so as a Scrum Master, okay, we looked at Scrum Master as a facilitator role. As a Scrum Master, it is your job to make sure that you bring together the right people who can resolve that blockage. Okay, or be able to help the team resolve that blockage. Okay, be able to collaborate the right skills together to help the resolution of that blockage. Okay, so remember, the daily Scrum meeting, time box to 15 minutes. The goal is not to collect status, it is a team huddle. Gives everybody team a sense of belongingness. It helps team members to understand what others are working on in the same team. Okay, very beneficial. Okay, so we are still talking about all the ceremonies that are there in Scrum. So we talked about sprint planning meeting, daily Scrum. Now there's a third ceremony which is called the sprint review meeting or sprint review. Sprint review is happens at the end of the sprint. Okay, when you have finished that time box duration. Okay, at that time, team comes together with the help of Scrum Master and product owner, and they try to demo. Think of it as a showcasing what you achieved in that sprint. Okay, so they try to demo what they have finished. The purpose of demo is uh, not to prove that they actually finished what they did, but it is more for inculcating confidence in yourself that this is what you committed and this is what we finished. Okay, there's a lot of benefit in doing that. Okay, planned, so you're comparing planned versus actual. Okay, that is a huge benefit right there, and also it inculcates a lot of confidence in product owner and Scrum Master and in the team itself that we are doing the things right way. Okay, that we are able to finish what we had committed. So we there must be something right that we are doing. Okay, it gives a lot of confidence in the team itself. It is good for the morale of the team. It is good for the motivation of the individuals. And then there's a fourth and the last meeting, okay, which is called the Sprint Retrospective, which is down at the bottom right here. The retrospective meeting is also very, very important. Okay, I have seen seasoned Scrum teams miss this retrospective meeting. Okay, it is also called retro for short. Okay, it's kind of for those of you who are more familiar with the traditional way of thinking or executing product, it is like lessons learned. Okay, but it is lessons learned in that sprint duration itself. Okay, it's kind of a feedback. You're getting a rapid feedback from the implementation that you just did to improve upon yourself. Okay, so a little bit of detail on the retrospective because it is so important. the all the team members, they come together just like they do in the daily Scrum meeting. All the team members, they come together and they take turns to answer 3 questions again. Okay, and Scrum Master is mediating. The 3 questions are: what are we doing that is right, or what is the good stuff that we should continue doing? That is the first question. The second question is, what is it that we are doing wrong and we should stop doing? Okay. And the third question is, what is it that we are not doing at all and we have to start doing? So continue doing, stop doing, and start doing. Okay, so 3 questions. Team take turns. It's not a quick meeting, but it has to be time boxed again. I have a team of 9 members total, including myself as a Scrum Master and product owner. They both also contribute to the retrospective. It takes me about hour and a half to hold a sprint retrospective. It is usually held at the end of the sprint, okay, or early next sprint, very close to sprint review. There are teams who would want to combine sprint review and sprint retrospective meeting together. That practice may also work for some of the teams. So just to recap, on the ceremonies, there's sprint planning meeting, there's daily Scrum meeting, there's sprint review meeting, and there's a retro. Okay. Now so we are still not finished with everything on this slide. Okay, there are a few artifacts that are also very important components in the Spring framework, in the Scrum framework. There's product backlog, which we have already talked about. Let me use a different color of pen. Okay. There is this product backlog, which is over here, which we talked about. It is the union of all the unfinished stories in the product. Okay, very important. There is sprint backlog, which we have also talked about. It is the stories that are committed to be completed in the sprint. Okay, and then there are all these charts. Okay, there are burn down charts, burn up charts, velocity charts, cumulative flow diagrams. There are all these charts that are also part of a Scrum framework. They are very fundamental artifacts in a Scrum framework. Okay, so very quickly, okay, this is a Scrum framework at a high level. Okay, we haven't really gone into the depths of what are how to build a Scrum team, what are the roles and the responsibilities of a Scrum Master, product owners. We haven't gone really into the depths of that. Okay, and we are not going to do that in this session. Maybe if I have suggestions, or there is enough if there's enough demand, I can go into that. But these are the big roles, and there are all these ceremonies. These ceremonies are very important. If these ceremonies are not conducted properly, or these meetings are not conducted properly, they result in waste of time and energy, which is directly proportional to the cost, and you defeat the purpose of the whole Agile framework, Agile methodology. Okay, so remember, there's a sprint, and at the end of the sprint, the finished work is shippable, should be useful for the customer, should add value to the customer. Okay, so what we'll do is, there are a couple of things that we talked about which are of extreme importance. Okay, so sprint planning. So let's look at the definition and what are the inputs and outputs here. So as definition, which we just looked at, sprint planning is an effort in which the product owner describes the highest priority stories in the product backlog, and the team then drives clarity. Okay, drives clarity is a keyword here, to decide which stories they can commit to in a given sprint. Okay, so you have your priorities right in the backlog. The team understands what is needed, driving clarity. And by after understanding that, they are able to do estimation and then able to commit to be able to finish that story in the given sprint. Okay. What are the inputs? So inputs are the product backlog. Okay, these are different techniques, prioritization techniques, estimation techniques, velocity, team calendar, etc., etc. And the output is the sprint backlog. Okay, so we looked at the sprint backlog here. This is the output from here to here. Also, one of the output that is not listed here is the adjusted product backlog. When you're popping stories out from here to here, there may be some changes here as well. Okay, it's possible that as a part of that driving clarity, you may have to readjust the priorities of these stories here that are not really adapted in the sprint, but they are in the product backlog. So there may be some adjustment in the product backlog as well. Okay. So this is sprint planning. Retrospective, as I was saying, is another very important thing. So just quickly recap on the definition. Retrospective or retro is a meeting in which is held at the end of every iteration or sprint. Sprint is a Scrum Framework specific term. Iteration is a generic term. And the group takes turns in answering the following three questions. Okay, what is working well? We should continue doing. What is not working? I should stop doing. And what is it that we should start doing? One thing that I did not mention about retrospective, and it is a common mistake. Okay, at the end of the retro meeting, okay, the team becomes more knowledgeable. It is a knowledge sharing exercise in Agile. But also, as a Scrum Master, you want to take good notes in the sense that they should be very clear cut. That there are action items that come out of retrospective. Those action items should be very clearly stated with very clear owner, and they need follow up. Okay, this thing is very easily missed in retro. Just because you documented everything doesn't mean that you'll start following it right away. Okay, there are some actions that are needed to be, that will take time and discipline to inculcate. So it's important that those actions are very clearly understood and a very clear owner is assigned. And it can be a collective owner. A team could be an owner of a particular retro item. Okay. I think I'm going to take a separate session on retrospective itself, on how to conduct a good retro meeting and how to take notes from it, and how, in my experience, what I have learned from the retro meetings. So I'll probably do that one of the other Fridays. So this is a Scrum framework at a glance. Any questions on Scrum framework before we go forward? I want to do a little bit of demo of Jira as a tool for Agile. But before that, we can take some question and answers. Okay, there's a question on sprint backlog. Yes, sprint backlog is okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I did not mention in Scrum, the sprint planning is expected to last about 8 hours. However, from my experience, those 8 hours are not enough. So as per Scrum says that we should invest at least 8 hours in doing sprint planning. And this sprint planning, even though it says meeting, it is not like a one-time thing that everybody will come together and they'll get everything, that they will have everything that they need. There'll be no distractions and they'll be able to do estimates. It usually never happens that way. This is a really good question, actually. So what happens is there are different ways of doing sprint planning. Okay, the way that works for me is that that sprint planning thing, the estimation and driving clarity, we reserve some time to do that for the next sprint in this sprint. Okay, so you're running sprint one, you're towards the end of sprint one, and you want to start sprint two right after sprint one. So what you do is towards the end of sprint one, like last 3 or 4 days of sprint one, you reserve a little bit of time. Everybody reserves one hour to do just sprint planning for sprint two. Okay, there are teams which handle it differently, where they finish sprint one, they don't care about sprint two at that point, and then they time box the planning, for one whole day. The team does nothing, but they sit together, look at all the stories, they do estimation, they drive clarity, and then they come out with the estimates, and then they commit. Okay, so they take a day gap in between the two sprints just to do planning and start the sprint a subsequent day. Okay, which is another way of handling it. Okay, both of them, they have their pros and cons, but the important thing here is that you must reserve time for doing sprint planning. Okay, another question is on the retro. Yes, retrospective happens at the end of every iteration. Yes, very important. I mean, you can combine sprint review and retro together if you want. Sometimes I do sprint review and retrospective together. I reserve 2 hours for it with the whole team, product owners, and we do retro and sprint review all together. Yes, a question about team size. Team size is expected to be 7 plus minus 2. So there could be small teams, small as 5 and as big as 9. There are teams that are bigger than that too, as an exception, like I was saying. Okay, I see. The question is, if you have more engineers, how? Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to create multiple teams. Okay, you want to, um, uh, you know, kind of think of it as a modules. Okay, module is not a very favorite term of mine, but you can break down your product into different areas. Okay, and create a team for that area. So if you, for example, if you have, let's say 20 engineers, you can create three high level areas, okay, or three areas, three modules, and you can create team for each module, and they can have the same sprint duration, they can have the same calendar in terms of sprint 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay, any more questions? Okay, very good. Let's in the interest of time, let's spend about 5 minutes or so. I just want to show a little bit. So there are different tools available for being agile. Okay, Jira is one of them. Search School, myself, we are not associated with Jira in any ways. Okay, it is just a tool that I like very much. I have used a few tools in my past experience, um, and I think Jira is the most satisfying of all. There are many more tools that are coming out every day that enhance agility. There are agile, they use the agile specific terms. There are Scrum specific tools. Um, but I'm gonna demonstrate. I'll try to demonstrate all the tools that I have experience with, or the ones that I have evaluated. I'll start with Jira because that's the most popular right now. Some of you may have already used it, even though you're not, even though you may not be using Agile as a methodology. It is a great issue tracking tool or bug tracking tool. A lot of people use it for different purpose, task tracking. Okay. So let's quickly look at it. I'm going to share it in my browser. So let's start with the dashboard. So this is how a Jira dashboard looks like. Okay, you have all these widgets that you can move around, like little widgets that you can move around depending on how you want to set up. So this is your dashboard. Okay, every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do is I look at my dashboard. It gives me a wealth of information. Okay, so you can see that there's a pie chart that is showing me who has what assigned. Um, you know, there are crucible charts. There are issue tracking charts. There are release related roadmap charts. There are all these activity streams. There are you know status and resource matrix that is shown here. There's a heat map. So there are various things that are available. Okay, there are many widgets that are available that you can just you can add a gadget. If you add a gadget here, you'll see how many you'll see. It's taking a while to open up. Why is that? Yeah, so you can see there are so many gadgets that are available. Okay, a lot of them are free. There are a lot of them that are also commercial, but they are very good. Okay, so you can just add so many gadgets here depending on how there are charts. Okay, so this is how a dashboard looks like in Jira. Okay, now what are these? I mean, we talked about tasks. So a task is you can treat a story as an artifact. Okay, so story is nothing but your requirements. So I'll show you an example of a story here. Okay, this is a story. Okay, export production line item to ticket from ticket queue. It has a description. Let me increase the font. So it has all these different attributes. Okay, what is a type, what is a status, which component, which team, duration, estimated time, remaining time, log time, and all that. Also, it has description here. So description is very clear, based on those of you who are familiar with that, user story template. As a type of user, I want to do something so that I can achieve something. So it's mentioned here. And then you have the acceptance criteria or the success criteria. It's kind of detailed here. Okay, and then you can see it has a chatter here, which is in the comments. Okay, so if there's a comments tab here, you can see there's chatter going on. What all was done. There are commits that happen, code commits. Okay, at the end you write down a closing summary that this is what we did and this is why we are closing the story. These are the issues that we found. Okay, there are various other charts. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling up and down very fast. Okay, there's a work log. You can see who logged work against the story, in what order. There's a history, there's activity, so you have an audit trail of what was done. Like if there were any attributes changed, by who it was changed, what was the old value, new value. There are source. Okay, Jira has very good integration with a lot of other tools. Okay, there are tools like Crucible, tools like Fisheye. Okay, so where you can track, what was committed in the source. You can see there are so many files that were committed for this one story. Okay, there are reviews. So this is where the code review is. Okay, so you can, if I clicked on this link, it'll take me to the code review. Okay, but these are all different plugins. So Jira has a plugin way of thinking. So if you were to create a new story, okay, what you would do is, create issue, and then you can select, what type of issue you want to create, and everything is customizable here. Okay, you as an administrator, there's an administrator role that one can have when you're setting up Jira, and you can create your own workflows. You can create your own attributes, types of attributes. You can create your own rules. Like you cannot close a particular story until your team has gone through this checklist. Until everything is checked in that checklist, you cannot close a story. You can create a simple rule like that. Okay, so if you are creating a new story in our product, we have all these different types of stories. There could be a story, there could be a simple repair, it could be an epic, arc blunder, deployment instructions, or bug. Okay, so and then you provide some summary and a description, set the priority. So you are showing only we in this view, in a quick view, we are showing only certain attributes. Okay, but you can show all as well. So your form will become bigger. So you have all these others, which team, release, fixed version, priority, theme, who's the sponsor, product owner, QA analyst, QA engineer, which component belongs to, effort, dev effort, QA effort, due date, everything. Okay, so it can be made very comprehensive, and depending on, it's a very flexible, very customizable, which is one of the things that I like very much. The other thing that I like is that there are plugins that are available. We are using an agile plugin called Greenhopper. Okay, it's very popular and very powerful. I cannot imagine not being able to use that plugin, or I cannot imagine a day without a Greenhopper uh, you know agile board. So Greenhopper is a very big plugin in itself. I'm going to take a separate tool discussion for that altogether. So let me come back to the presentation. So also there are filters I did not show. Okay, so this is, you can write a JQL. It's called Jira Query Language. Just like you have SQL, you can filter. Like you can see we have stories running in 13,000s. Okay, so if you want to find something based on certain attributes, certain team, you can create a query like this. Okay, and it is a very very easy to create this query. It is very much like SQL, and it has IntelliSense. Like it tells you, uh, when to add booleans, when to add values. It suggests. So if I were to go into components, it will component in. It will show me all the components that are in there, and I can start typing, and it'll show me all the list of available. So it's called type ahead. Those of you who are familiar with that um, user experience term. Okay, then you can search, you can save, you can share, you can turn this into a chart. So a lot of good stuff here. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. Let me go back to the presentation. Let's quickly look at two questions, sample questions, okay, so just to exercise what we have learned today. The first one, please read the question yourself and give me the answer privately to me in the chat, please. Thank you. Okay, I've received responses already. A lot of them already. Thank you. Keep going. We have another 30 seconds before I reveal the answer. Okay, very good. Almost all of you got it right. The correct answer is D. Product backlog contains all the stories, I should correct the typo here, that are unfinished in the product. Okay, everything else is wrong. All the stories that are needed in the product, not everything. All the stories that are complete, that is definitely not the product backlog. All the stories that are adopted in the sprint, that is a sprint backlog. Let's take one more question and we'll wrap it up. Okay, so I got a very mixed response to this one. The correct answer here is C. So keep in mind, retrospective is held at the end of every sprint or iteration. Okay, release is a different term. Okay, release is not a sprint. Okay, you may do work in multiple sprints, sprint 1, 2, and 3, and then you may decide to release to your website or to your customer. Okay, however, at the end of every sprint, the work that you produce is shippable or is releasable. Doesn't mean that you have to absolutely release it at that time. You may or may not, but a release is a different term in itself. So retro, however, is held after the end of every sprint so that we can learn. We get a feedback and we learn from it. Okay, so with this, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for attending. You can always reach me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Gmail directly. The next free webinar, this 1 hour free webinar, is going to be on 13th December. Okay, 2 weeks from now, same time. And we are also doing the ACP training or the Agile training to get the ACP. Those of you who are interested in PMI's Agile certification, that training is on 21st and 22nd December. Okay, 2 days on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. It's going to be about 7 to 8 hours each day with breaks, and it's going to be very fulfilling. Contains a lot of good information, very good content. Also, you'll get a lot of sample questions. You'll have your own access to the website. So those of you who want to get certified by PMI in Agile, it's going to be a great thing in your resume. And if you're looking for 21 PDUs, which is one of the eligibility criteria for taking that certification, you can get them from 21st and 22nd December. Okay, you can register for it on the Cert School's website. So just go to certschool.com and follow the links for Agile classes. You'll find it. Okay. Thank you very much. Hope you have a good weekend, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.